Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us. That's Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found.
This is the
Independent
Filmmaker's Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
Hello, and welcome back to the Independent Filmmaker's Guide. I am your host, James Allardyce, and I am joined with Matt Mundy. Matt, what's up, man?
Hey, James, man, what a wonderful talk we have ahead of us coming in with director Nicole Newnham.
That's right. She is the director of the documentary, The Disappearance of Shere Hite.
Yeah.
Very cool stuff here. Obviously, it's a documentary episode, so it's going to be, vastly different in process and style, some of which is they did it completely different. It's not write it, shoot it, edit it, right?
They basically, what we learned, and she'll talk about, is how she and her lead editor worked hand in hand, and they were editing as they went. So that was a really cool part of the conversation to hear about, and how that informed Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And also, as far as the cohesiveness, we'll get into the casting as well.
The casting, because there is some incredible voiceover work done by Dakota Johnson. Really incredible.
Yeah, she just tied it together, and I love how Nicole goes into this. So looking forward to how that old adage that you say comes to fruition.
Casting is half the battle. We'll hear about that and much more in this episode about documentary filmmaking for the film The Disappearance of Shere Hite. And we're back. Thanks for being here. I'm James Allardyce, your host, here with Matt Mundy. What's up, Matt?
How's it going, James?
Pretty good. As I said just a moment ago, we are joined today by the director of The Disappearance of Shere Hite, Nicole Newnham. Nicole, thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here with you.
Thank you so much for letting us see the film. I think it's a beautiful movie, and a very powerful story, sad at points, of course. I think we always start with, the inception of the idea of the movie and the writing of the film, and then we move to production. I don't know that with a film like this and with a documentary in general, we'll be able to separate the writing from the production of the film, but we'll see where it goes, and we'll start with that. So can you just, I guess, taking a step back, would you just tell us about the film? What is the film about, and how did you come up with the idea and desire to make it?
So the film is about Shere Hite. She was a household name in the 1970s and 80s, and she has been largely completely forgotten by time. She was very important personally to me because she wrote a book called the Hite Report, which was one of the best-selling books of all time, and it was a survey of thousands of women. It was called the Hite Report on Female Sexuality, and it surveyed thousands of American women about the most intimate details of their sex lives, asking them, over 100 questions about how they orgasmed, how they felt during sex, what they fantasized about, all of these things. And it arrived in our culture like an atomic bomb. I mean, people were so shocked by the revelations of what women were actually thinking and feeling because they'd really never been surfaced before. It was such a different way of approaching looking at female sexuality than something like Kinsey or Masters and Johnson. And her primary finding was that women didn't orgasm, largely speaking, from intercourse, but almost all women orgasmed from clitoral stimulation. And that was just like a shocking and important revelation to people. It kind of changed everything about the way women thought about their own bodies and their own right to pleasure. And also it changed the way men thought about how to give women pleasure during sex. So Cher is an extraordinary person who kind of was almost like a space alien who came down from another planet and was looking at the structures of how we set up sexuality and what we thought sex was in a curious and inquisitive way. And I read the book when I was 12 years old, and it was like a portal to me into a world of sexuality that I really had no access to. So it was really important to me. And when I read in 2020 that she had passed away, and the obituary headline in the New York Times said, Shere Hite, she explained how women orgasm, and she was hated for it. Yeah. I was deeply shocked and intrigued and wanted to find out why. And that led me to kind of wondering, not only how did she do her work and what happened to her, but how is it that a woman who so profoundly changed our culture and was literally everywhere in our consciousness could disappear from it? And that's the sort of story we set out to tell in the film.
Obviously, she wrote a powerful book. The film in itself feels like, almost a bio. I was going to ask if it was based on a book or a magazine article or something, but it sounds like it was this just kind of that was the inspiration, is wanting to get into her, and then you just looked it all up yourself or with your team.
Yeah, because I know that there was the her collection at the Schlesinger Library, right? And as well as the Hite Report itself, or was it the Hite Report on Shere Hite? Right?
Yeah, she wrote a book, an autobiography called The Hite Report on Shere Hite. And then she also gave her archive to the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. And that was full of the original surveys and a lot of personal writings and little scraps of paper, photographs, videotapes, audio cassettes that survey respondents sent to her, all kinds of, the grist for making a kind of documentary collage to tell her story. And the enterprise was kind of to try to, bring her back to people kind of fully as she was. And we didn't even really know who she was by the time she had been so kind of, because, the story is structured a little bit like a rise and fall story, right? Mm-hmm. She does this amazing thing, and then she provokes this incredibly vicious backlash from men and the rising Christian right and all of that. And so that's kind of the answer to how did she get silenced and forgotten, and we can see it all playing out in real time. So the really tricky thing was not to find the clips of all the misogyny and criticism and all of that, but it was really to try to figure out for ourselves who she was beyond this caricature that she'd been turned into, and so part of it was looking in the archive and reading her autobiography, but a lot of it was actually speaking to people who had worked with her and been friends with her. And because she kind of looked like this 1930s film star and was really into kind of like dressing up and creating this kind of mysterious and compelling persona, she actually had dated a lot of photographers and artists. So we were finding these incredible collections of photographs and things from people that we met. And, just the archival material just kept kind of raining down on us, almost like she herself had been kind of planning for us to find it one day, and piece back together the fascinating and kind of really like courageous and optimistic person that she was.
Yeah, I would say I just roughly counted no less than 150 sources for the archival footage, which is just incredible.
We had an amazing team.
Yes. Yeah. Just between what was listed in the archival footage as well as the extra archival footage. And I mean, so I guess to circle back to James's question specific, did you start with knowing you wanted to go there, or with that footage and with the stuff she had written on herself, or was that something that was in the discovery as you were writing and doing development?
From reading her autobiography and from looking through the archive, initially, and reading other things that she had written in articles about her, the kind of outlines of the structure of the film really took place in my mind, kind of at the beginning in the development phase, even, I knew I really wanted to set the film primarily in New York City because she arrived as a graduate student at Columbia from University of Florida, and immediately experienced this huge kind of like slap down from the, predominantly male faculty there, to her ideas and her thoughts about sexuality, and even just kind of who she was as this, not Ivy League educated person who presented like a model, and in fact was modeling for Playboy and Pulp Fiction covers and things like that, So, but then she finds her way into the feminist movement in New York City and really becomes a part of that movement. And it's kind of like really optimistic, kind of wild, creative heyday. And that was something I really wanted to bring to life, because I felt like the Hite Report wouldn't have happened unless she had been a part of that movement and gotten the idea to send out these surveys, and then found this whole community of people to help her make it happen. So in that sense, it's really kind of like a movement story. And I saw that as the first act. And then I saw the second act as her, bringing the book out into the world and what it engendered and how that impacted her, and then the third act is kind of a coda where she gets involved in this really kind of personally healing and transformational work in Paris, taking pictures again, like taking nude pictures again, but this time with a female photographer, kind of through a female gaze, and actually being able to escape the viciousness of the US and kind of rediscover herself. So that was the scaffolding, but then how we were going to do that and what that would all be made up of. It's not really a process like writing, because like you say, we were still discovering things. We had a student at Harvard, the archive was locked down because of COVID. So we had to hire a student to go in and, send us material. We were just finding things constantly, people we'd tried to call, but we couldn't get through to them, suddenly call us back. And we have another whole box full of things to go through. So it was kind of like a back and forth. We were shooting and editing at the same time, and, kind of writing the story and constructing it. And I would liken it more to like archaeology, like you're finding the little pot shards that you're piecing together to create a vase with a group of people, producers, researchers, editors, myself, all creating kind of like a hive mind of all of these tiny little things. And as we work through the story, kind of, experimenting with which ones we're going to most powerfully tell the story.
Right. And one person you interview is probably going to give you another piece of information for you to chase down the next thing, and so on and so forth, right?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Or the editor is working on a scene, and suddenly the meaning of the scene kind of changes. And then we think, oh, we need to find something else. And we go down a rabbit hole looking for that. And that leads us to another whole trove of material, and it was just like this. It was a very absorbing, I think hopefully you get a sense of that in the film. It was just we were building a world that was really aesthetically gorgeous because of how she cared so much about aesthetics, and had a particular color palette and particular kind of fashion style. And so loved Rachmaninoff concertos. There were so many clues about how we would kind of bring this world to life in a way that put the viewer inside her head and kind of told the story from her point of view. So we all became a little bit obsessed with it. And, it was like you'd have to go down to dinner at night and kind of shake it out of your head so you could be in this world. Because, Shere Hite's world of, the mid 1970s in New York City was a pretty compelling place to live. And it was definitely a labor of love.
You definitely feel that during the film. It's definitely a film about a time and place as much as it is about a person, I would say. And I think that's, incredibly successful on your part. Speaking of time and places, so you're doing this process, you have all these different things happening at the same time with editing and doing more interviews and researching and finding more archival pieces. What, start to finish, how did this all happen, and what frame of time?
Oh, well, I read the obituary in 2020 and started kind of doing my own research about Shere. And then I had kind of given up on the idea, honestly, because I kept thinking like, this is going to be being turned into, a Netflix series or something. It's just such an alluring story, and she's such a magnetic character. And I tend to kind of like personally as a filmmaker, I like to kind of root around in stories that people don't know about, and bring them to light, like my previous film that I worked on with Jim Lebrecht, Crip Camp,
Right.
and that's kind of my happy place. So I thought, I don't know if I should do this. And then I kept thinking about it, and I got set up in a general meeting with Molly O'Brien, who's the head of documentary at NBC News Studios. And Molly said, you should really think about working with us if you have projects in mind. We're developing things all the time that may or may not be for, NBC platforms. Like, for example, we're developing a project about a female sex researcher from the 1970s. And I said, Molly, is it Shere Hite? Because if it's Shere Hite, I really want to do that film. And so she came back a couple of weeks later and said, yeah, it is Shere Hite. And it turned out there had been a producer there who's, I'm in my 50s. Erica Fink was in her 30s. And she had, read the same obituary as me and went and looked in the NBC archive to see what was in there. And this like massive trove of material popped up, like she had typed in, Lady Diana or something. Mm-hmm. And she just thought, how in the world is it possible that this woman did this thing? And I've never heard of her. I studied women's studies, So yeah, we were coming to it from the same place, just different generations apart. And it was exciting to come together around it. And then we started, it took us a while we developed a sizzle reel. I brought on the editors that I had loved working with on Crip Camp, Lauren Schwartzman, and was our assistant editor on Crip Camp. And she became an associate editor on this project. And Eileen Meyer, who was one of the editors of Crip Camp, was the editor of The Disappearance of Shere Hite. And Mary Lamson, who's kind of our, guru, mentor, advisor, on legendary documentary editor, joined us too. So we had a really strong team. And I think by the time we got the funding together, it was, we did an initial shoot in Paris in 2021, but in 2022, at the beginning of the year, we started doing interviews in earnest, but we also started cutting, at the same time.
Okay.
And then we had a mandate to deliver by the Sundance deadline, which seemed impossible. But we just kept at it. And luckily, our producers, we had ended up partnering with This Machine, RJ Cutler and Elise Pearlstein and Trevor Smith's company out in Los Angeles. And along with NBC, and everyone was really great about letting us work the way we wanted to, which is that we worked pretty linearly through the story. And we kind of fine cut every chunk. We didn't feel we had the capacity to go through in that short of a timeline, like make a big mess and then figure it out from there collaboratively kind of thing. We felt like we had to sort of like do each act, kind of sequentially. And that required a lot of faith on the part of the producers because they had to believe that the original concept was going to actually work without having seen the third act until very late in the game, But luckily they did believe us and we believed us and we were able to, to make the late deadline. And then, we just kept on plowing through to the finish line, hoping we would get into Sundance, and we did.
Production speaking, did you have your team in place for a set amount of time, or was it, kind of stop and go in terms of, were you getting everything in like this month we're going to get all these interviews, or was it kind of you do that for a little while and then you stop down and do more research and come back? I mean, how does it work, with your crew and everything?
Yeah, we had pretty much everybody on the whole time. More or less. There was a chunk at the beginning where we didn't have the editor on, but that was just for a couple of months. And then past that point, we had producers who were, at NBC who were really journalists and researchers, and that was really handy. Really brilliant people who had the capacity to kind of like chase things down on a moment's notice, I would say, I would love to have a clip of, the response to Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing from the point of view of feminists. And they would deliver it within like 2 days, like the perfect thing. It was pretty incredible, actually, what they were able to do. They were meeting random people who had, met Shere Hite in Central Park, and talking them into trusting us and telling us their stories. And it was really a fabulous process. But yeah, it really was, everything was interwoven. I think all documentaries are like that, but I think this one was more so like that than anything else I've ever done.
I was going to say,
go
ahead.
Do all the interviews at the same time, like we had a list and we did we did a core group, and then we cut, and then we saw who we wanted to add. And, there were some people we had originally thought we would want to talk to. We realized we didn't need to. And there were other people we realized we really had to talk to. So that was sort of playing out too across that time.
Well, that kind of answered one of my questions, which was, as you're gathering with your producers and, who are giving you leads when you were putting together the lists of people you wanted to interview, was Regina Ryan high on that list to begin with, or was that a surprise because she felt like such a linchpin in so much of the storytelling? Her and Carla J, who are introduced very early on, but then also become very much the groundwork. And of course, we see Regina a lot more. So I just wanted to kind of pick up on that, what you were alluding to, people that you weren't sure and people that you knew and where they were. Was Regina a surprise, or was that someone you were going after early on?
Yeah, like Regina was somebody that we were going after early on because, she was the editor of the Hite Report, which was the 30th best-selling book of all time.
Right.
So it was pretty, amazing to us that we even had access to her. And of course, we reached out to her and she was totally delighted to hear from us, and has not been giving interviews about having done that, or really has not been acknowledged for having done that for a really long time. She was also the first female editor-in-chief of a major publishing firm. Right. She happened to be in a powerful position at exactly the right time and meet Shere and have the idea for that book and whatnot. So yeah, she was initially very high on the list, and it was actually some of the anecdotes and storytelling from her that really gave us confidence in the story originally. Mm-hmm. Then there were other people like Gene Simmons, for instance. Like, right. I never would have thought that Gene Simmons would have ended up in this film,
Right.
But we were looking for how could we get into her fabulous Fifth Avenue apartment that everybody said was like a palace, and it's
which
so
went
incredible.
Full Rococo. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's just this amazing old New York, mansion, and right on Fifth Avenue, right across from the Central Park Zoo. Yep. And we would stand outside and look longingly in the window, and we couldn't get anyone to agree to let us go in and film. And so we were looking up the real estate records, just looking for any way that we could connect to somebody who might be able to pressure the management and let us in there. And in the real estate records, we discovered that, Gene Simmons and Donna Summer had been Shere Hite's neighbors. So then we thought, well, yes. Gene, oh, I'm so sorry. Then we thought, well, did Gene Simmons know Shere? And we luckily had a contact to him, and we reached out to him, and he was, to our complete delight and surprise, really had warm and fond memories of Shere. They'd been friends, and he wanted to talk about it. So there were just these sort of surprises like that would come up in the context of, fleshing out a particular place or a story that then became really key. And we were able to get a connection to, Robert Gottlieb, the Knopf editor who edited her men's book and is one of the most legendary literary editors of our time. His daughter really generously connected us to him, and we were able to interview him too, which was also really important. So yeah, it was a mixed bag.
Yeah. I was going to say, so obviously Bob Gottfeld, I was guessing he was probably not in your sights, but because of the connection, you were able to bring him in. And really enjoyed some of his insight there in what I would call the bad girl flamboyant section, where he's introduced.
It definitely is the bad girl flamboyant section, and then it takes this really emotional turn right into like her insights about the men's responses to her questions about their intimate lives, and Robert Gottlieb is an incredibly sensitive and insightful man who's kind of unusually unburdened by the constructs of masculinity, or gender. It was just the perfect person to kind of, lead us into that. And I really looked for that in terms of casting the interviews. My goal was to have it feel like this interconnected, warm group of people. Every single person, nobody just commenting on what she was like, but each person tied into a story about how her work came together, and came to be, so that the story feels like it's being told by a community of her collaborators.
Right.
And then we developed this structure of meeting the characters kind of in place, so you don't meet Bob Gottlieb until you get to the men's book. You don't meet Jean Simmons until she gets the apartment on Fifth Avenue, and each person is kind of introduced with a visual card of what they looked like in the past, and is kind of like we hoped to make it kind of surprising and delightful, the kind of different, diverse, idiosyncratic characters that you would meet, and each person being kind of resonant of the time and place as well as their part of the story, so it was very delicate kind of casting. And you mentioned Carla J. I mean, Carla J, we wanted to talk with because we knew that she had been very supportive of Shere, and that she'd actually written a book called The Gay Report in the style of the Hite Report. Mm-hmm. And she's just a really important person in queer history, and we really wanted to speak with her and see what she had to say. And she actually told us that Shere Hite identified as bisexual, which we hadn't heard. So that then, of course, became important, and we constructed a scene around, sort of how they met in this gay academic union, very early on, really on the cutting edge of that, and how they were actively trying to rediscover stories out of queer and feminist history that had been suppressed in the 1920s, which sets up the suppression of Shere's own work and research and story later on, But all of that is really important structural stuff that I couldn't have written initially because I didn't know it until I heard about it from Carla J.
Right.
You have a diversity of people, but you also have a diversity of media in this movie. Obviously, you have, interviews that you're getting, today, and you also have archival footage, and old magazine clippings and all these different, things from the past. But when I think about the film, I don't think of it as being augmented. It feels very cohesive, and it feels very streamlined, and, it doesn't feel like a bunch of things smashed together. It feels like it knows its own identity. As a director, how did you accomplish that? I mean, you already spoke somewhat about the music elements that you put in there with the Rachmaninoff and the aesthetics. What was it, and how did you bring it all together to have that cohesive feel?
Well, I mean, I think it was a combination of me and our editors having a very strong, clear vision for kind of how Shere Hite would have wanted to see herself on screen, and also our cinematographers. We had our DP was a woman named Rose Bush, and then also there was a French cinematographer who filmed the Paris scenes, Naomi Amarje, and so we all talked a lot about the aesthetic that we were trying to put together, and there were different aspects of it that were important. The specific color palette, like I mentioned, was really important. This kind of like Rococo maximalist thing that Shere loved, kind of even in the very first shot of the film, you see her writing at her desk, and the desk is covered with all these tchotchkes, and we worked with the colorist to color each of them in her color palette, for instance. And then you see her beautiful handwriting, and that itself becomes kind of a character. So all those things are introduced to you. And this is when you ask how I do it, I mean, it's really like, you should ask Eileen Meyer, our editor, how she did it, because she's a genius at this. I mean, she really is. And it's what I've always really admired about her capacity in editing. So these things are like introduced to you as character attributes. And so you understand the meaning of them. And that's the thing I think Eileen does really well. Every little fragment, you kind of understand the meaning of it as a fragment. And therefore, it doesn't seem like hodgepodgey. It's not like I'm the director showing you a bunch of stuff, you know? It's like you're meeting her like a real cinematic character. And part of what we worked out early on with Rose, the DP, was since Cher spent so much time imagining herself as kind of like the heroine of these 1930s movies, which we heard from many people and herself in her writings and audio cassette tapes we listened to, we wanted to position her like that. So we made a decision to shoot material that kind of flows in and out of the interview subjects with the interview subjects themselves in 16 millimeter so that it would match the archival and there would be a flow back and forth. And then we made a decision to pull everything into an anamorphic frame, which normally in a film like this with a bunch of really crappy video assets from the 1980s, you would never do, because you have to blow it up and then it starts to degrade further. So we did a lot of tests and kind of asked ourselves a lot of painful questions about, you know, what was more important. And we decided that the capacity to bring all the archival into the anamorphic frame, which required reframing every shot, basically, right?
Right.
Was accomplishing something really powerful in terms of making the film feel like a scripted movie and not like a documentary. In other words, you know, you're not just watching like a wide shot of two people when you're watching a news clip. You're actually, you know, moving into Cher and giving her like a heroic, you know, character frame, or Geraldo or whatever. You know, we could use the framing to make that silly show Leave It to the Women, where she's being, you know, interrogated by a panel of actors like, you know, a soap opera actor who played a stripper, and Michael Conrad from Hill Street Blues, you know, about her methodology. We were able to kind of, you know, really make that, our conceit with that was to make it feel like a Western showdown almost, you know, all these men facing off against this one woman, and we're really blowing them up and making them, you know, feel menacing. So I think that's one of the things that really helped it feel, like you said, like a
cohesive,
like of a piece. Yeah,
it really did. And you know, as you're saying this, that's when I think about it, you know, it's like what I keep thinking that I was watching all this footage of Cher that, you know, you didn't film, and yet it feels like you did. You know, it feels the same as the other elements in the movie, which I think, you know, is a great accomplishment.
Yeah, and a testament
we're kind of able to direct it that way, you know.
Another element that I thought was so well done and that really brought the whole thing together was the voiceover throughout of her.
Dakota Johnson doing the voiceover for that. Sorry, go ahead, James.
It's incredible. I mean, again, so cohesive and so. I mean, you referred to Cher earlier almost as a space alien type energy. I didn't have those words, but, you know, watching the film, I definitely felt this otherworldly, you know, ethereal, very interesting vocal pattern, resonance, all those things. How did you go about finding that voice, you know, for the voiceover and coaching with the actor, or, you know, what was the process of that?
Well, it took us a long time to figure out what we wanted the voice to sound like. And in the meantime, Eileen, our editor, put in her voice. And over time, we realized that even though Eileen's voice sounds nothing like Cher's, there was a quality to it that was, you know, she was in her 30s. And there was just this sort of like very intimate, kind of simple way that she was speaking that felt very direct and immediate, less like somebody writing about their past and looking back, but somebody in the moment. And the writings that we chose, that was what we prioritized. You know, we prioritized things that we found in the archive that were written contemporaneously with scenes that we had created. You know, so for instance, with that, there's a scene where we see like a Wii magazine spread that she was in, which is kind of this weird S&M fashion spread where she's being tied up and men have big guns, and she's naked, and yet the text is like, Frank for kidnapping. Frank wears a, Hermes sweater and things like that. It's just, it's a very disturbing and weird magazine spread. And we juxtaposed that with her writings that we found in the archive, which were literally like flames, like things she came back after a long day of modeling and just like, was typing up about her feelings about the modeling industry and the commercialization of this kind of dehumanization of women's sexuality and all of that. And so I think by making those sections have that kind of like really immediate contemporaneous tone, and then it really made sense to have somebody who felt like we wanted it to feel like you were in her head at these various times, Right. And so, so that kind of led us to Dakota, a voice like Dakota's as an actress, and I had seen The Lost Daughter, and went and watched it again and was just blown away all over again by how insanely amazing she is in that film, and how she can just conjure this incredible intimacy and kind of like blend of strength and fragility, which I thought was very Shere. And we also knew that she was a real proponent of sex positivity and female sexual health and wellness. She's the co-creative director of a company called Mod that sells like vibrators and other products. And she's just awesome in that way. So we thought maybe she would be interested, but lo and behold, not only was she interested, but when she called me back, she said, I just need to tell you, I'm a huge fan of Shere Hite. I love Shere Hite. If I could have dinner with her, I would, and I was flabbergasted that she actually even knew who Shere Hite was, So, so we formed a kind of a partnership with Tea Time Pictures, her company, and she and her producing partner, Ro Donnelly, are executive producers on the project. And in terms of the coaching, I mean, somebody like Dakota Johnson, doesn't really need a lot of coaching. I mean, I was very, very, very amazed by her. I know she spent a lot of time with the film, right? Which you don't have in a scripted film. You don't have a guide like that. So I think, she had all that kind of background context and everything. And I think she really resonated with the story and really cared about it. So we had kind of really intimate dialogue, around every line. But I was stunned by what she was accomplishing with her read. It far surpassed our expectations.
Wow.
Eileen and I cut it in late at night after she recorded it in our hotel room, and we were literally sitting there crying because we felt like our whole goal was to try to really get to know Shere Hite, and Dakota helped us do that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it definitely comes off, watching, it almost gives us there's a spooky quality to it almost. To me, it felt like it was the voice was so similar, and also so engaging. So that there's the adage, right? Casting is half the battle. It's right. One of those stories.
Oh, really? I mean, yeah, she's an uncommonly incredible talent. And I think, it matters if you're really invested. I think, it's funny because I've gotten some criticism from old feminists at some of these screenings that we're doing around the country about basically like, oh, 50 Shades of Grey isn't a feminist film, so what do you have to say about casting Dakota Johnson? And I just have to say, I think sexuality is such a complicated, thorny subject in our culture, and anyone who treads into it and deals with it in any way suffers backlash like that, And that's the whole point of our story.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't seem like much has changed since the interviews with Shere that did the same thing. And especially after at least the way you construct the story to be like, okay, she could push as hard as she wanted with the first report, but as soon as she did it on men's sexuality, it was a little too far.
The response was a little different.
Yeah, and that was very interesting to watch develop. And a total editorial question, which was when you get to 1981. And this is after I had the thought, because we were talking about kind of a zeitgeist of what was happening in the late 70s with the other part of the sexual revolution and clinical psychology that's mentioned in the, but also like it reminded me of the, Harvey Milk was also shot in 78, and just the anyone who fought against the stereotypical of what it was to be to understand sex as the way it was presented beforehand, and so just a riling up, and then you cut to in 1981. It was an interview with Mike Douglas, and I just wanted to know what stood out about the David Hasselhoff guest sitting there that was like, I want this in, because I love it first of all, but I'm just personally interested as from the storytelling process, because you had so many clips that I don't want to make it sound like I'm doubting. Why did you put that in there? I'm just curious of everything. You're like, oh, this is going to make that point, because it did. But I just wanted to ask you about that because I thought it was awesome.
I mean, that clip is just insane, I mean, it's so wildly entertaining, and it's kind of like when you see a clip like that, you think about, well, it's so entertaining because basically I'll describe it in case people haven't seen it, but basically,
I'm kind of teasing it up for our listeners.
So I mean, she's talking about I think essentially Mike Douglas is asking, like, well, what is the female sexuality in the Hite Report? How has it changed the male's response? And meaning, like, are men learning something from this? And she's trying to describe how men actually could take a cue from the book and recognize that clitoral stimulation is what is going to help women achieve orgasm and incorporate that into their lovemaking, which was her big message. And she gets halfway through it, and Hasselhoff interrupts her. And he's trying to say something very sincere, right, which is that, but sometimes women are embarrassed by that, is really what he's trying to say, but he can't say it. He starts to say it, and then he stumbles, and then he, says, God, how do you even talk about these things?
How do you talk about these things? Literally says
like,
that.
Yes.
How do you talk about this stuff? How do you talk about this stuff?
Yeah, how do you talk about it? And he's beet red, and Mike Douglas is kind of teasing him, mercilessly.
Yeah.
And Cher is just as cool as a cucumber, kind of like blowing smoke around like a femme fatale and kind of teasing him, but not ridiculing him, just kind of opening up the space for the dialogue. And so I think it does show how unprepared men were, for what she was trying to say. But I hope it shows it, and I thought it showed it in a funny but kind of actually quite kind way, because I think, you see that in that context, Hasselhoff actually should get props, for trying to talk about it.
Yeah,
he wouldn't do that now.
Yeah, it comes on the heels of all the other actors like really lambasting her that you were talking about earlier, and then you see David piping up in support and losing halfway through what he's trying to say. It is, and that's why I had to just ask editorially, and I just thought that was great. So yeah, I just wanted to tease that up for anybody who hadn't seen it, for that wonderful moment in the story.
It's pretty awesome, and because you've been kind of following along with the construction of Cher's persona and her image as this kind of like 1930s movie heroine. It's like she really gets her kind of Betty Davis moment in that scene too, which I think is satisfying for people, But so I had some struggles in the edit because, there's a little scene up earlier where she goes out with her friend Mike Wilson, the photographer, and they're going out to old movies downtown, and she's buying a hat that makes her look like Greta Garbo, and they're setting up pictures to make her look like an old movie star. And when we were trying to cut the film down, that was like the candidate number one on the chopping block. Like, why do you need the Greta Garbo hat story of all the things in this film, And I just really felt strongly that it had to be there, partially for that payoff, down the road in that scene, but just so that people were along for the ride with that. They weren't objectifying her and thinking like, why does she dress like that? And why does she act like that? And feeling distant from it. They were in it and understanding it as kind of a form of self-expression and play, that everybody has a right to, and we all enjoy dressing up and putting on personas, but women are so demeaned and criticized for it. And she certainly was.
Yeah. I mean, even to your anecdote about Dakota Johnson and doing one movie and being criticized for it and saying that takes away from her authority, just like Cher was modeling and somehow that took away from her authority. And it's that part of the storytelling I found quite compelling. And to that end, this kind of is one of the larger questions that you've talked about as we've gone. Did you see in this final act where it's the disappearance of her, as you were doing the script and you had to do it piece by piece with Eileen, did you know, okay, this is where we have to bring it home, or I've planted this seed in this act and now I have to pay it off? Or was it like, oh my gosh, I still don't understand. How did this happen? This is a woman with a top 30, best-selling book, and it's unique in its own. It's one of the only in sexology. Everything else that's a top 30 of all time is children's literature and fantasy outside of Dr. Spock's book. And so here it is, like it is on its own. So was that as surprising to you as you continued to tell the story?
Yeah, it continued to kind of shock us. And I think what we wanted was to, in the third act, have people feel the full weight of that, not just as something unique to share, but as part of a cycle of response to feminism in particular in this story. But what, like you were talking before about Harvey Milk, really, it's the cycle of response to any kind of social movement, pushing things forward and challenging dominant paradigms, right? So you have the advances of the civil rights movement, and then you have like a backlash against that. You have the advances of the, gay rights movement and the backlash against that, which was happening, which Cher was involved in as well. And then, you have this backlash against the feminist movement, which has, been building and led us all the way to where we have, the Roe reversal, which happened right in the middle of our making this film. So I believe that oftentimes the way to get people to really feel emotionally the weight of structural things is by focusing on a particular story. So like with Crip Camp, we were telling the story of how this little hippie summer camp helped to spark the disability rights movement. It's really the story of, kind of disability rights in this country writ large and how the ADA came to be. But you tell it through a bunch of, adorable hippie teenage campers that you fall in love with, so people can really feel it. And I think with Cher, we were hoping people would really be in her mind and be rooting for her. And thereby, when you get to the third act, then that's when we start pulling back and showing Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing, or showing, Pat Robertson, and showing and having people start to comment on the fact that this is a recurring kind of thing in feminist history, that people will discover the clitoris, for instance, and then put it in anatomical drawings, and then they forget about it, and it stops even appearing on anatomical drawings, and then somebody has to go in and find it again. And, how ludicrous is that? On our production, many people did not know how to pronounce the word clitoris because they never had said it before. People read it and they know it, but they don't ever say it. Imagine if nobody knew how to pronounce the word penis. It's just pretty wild. So
it's almost as if it's like a Sisyphus rock push. Like if you don't keep pushing the rock, it's going to go back down.
Sorry. Sorry, you want to start that over? I apologize.
Oh no, it's just saying it was just like, it's kind of like Sisyphus pushing the rock up. I mean, just because it's been written about or it's been done, you can't step away from putting the energy into it, because it will, as you say in the title, disappear.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we were trying to do in the third act, and then at the same time we were trying to give Cher herself the dignity of not just having her like be this total victim who vanished, because she wasn't. She kept working, she kept writing, she kept trying, she kept engaging. And she also figured out a way to kind of like, get rid of the male gaze and do the thing that she loved, this sort of, performative photography. And really, like, I think she and her life and her self-construction was really an art piece, and she was free to be an artist in that way in Europe in a way that she wasn't here. So we were also trying to hit that note as well. That was really important to us. And at the same time, figure out, how do you leave people both enraged and upset at this sort of structural repetition, but also hopefully leave them inspired by what she was able to accomplish, and the memory of how she did it, which was get out in the streets and be creative with a bunch of friends and figure out cool, weird, creative things that you could do to try to interrupt the dominant structure. So I think that's kind of where we are as a society. We have to get back to that place. And I think the forces of kind of media consolidation and the rise of the Christian right and all the things that you sort of see brewing in the film have kind of beaten us down to a point where we forget that we have that kind of agency that Cher insisted on believing that she had, even when she was, being punished as a result of that.
Well, I can certainly say that it was well received by us, and that that your goals were accomplished on our viewing, and I hope they're accomplished on the viewings of the wider audience. Where can people see the movie?
They can see it right now in theaters in New York and LA, and on December 1st, it's going to open up more broadly to other markets around the country. They can go to sharehitedoc.com, which is an IFC website. It's being distributed by IFC Films to figure that out, and then it should be streaming at some point next year.
And how about you? Where can people find out what your next project is, or what you're going to be up to, working on next?
They can follow me on Instagram. It's at Nicole Newnham.
Okay, great. Well, we really appreciate you coming on here and talking through the wacky, crazy world of making a documentary from start to finish. I'm sure we could probably keep going and talk all night, but we appreciate all your stories and your journey through the process, and we wish the best of luck to you.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you both.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, as is this podcast. So be sure to follow us on Instagram at framework_productions. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to IFG wherever you get your podcasts. But no matter where you do listen, if you could also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts specifically, that really is one of the best ways to broaden, strengthen our community, as well as just helping us make these episodes better. Speaking of, if there's something you'd like for us to cover on a future episode, we are now on Discord. Just look in the show notes for more. IFG, how movies get made. Hey friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about two personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd, H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV, and of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's HERD.FILM, herd.film as well. Thank you again, and be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.